A profound order emanates from the stones of a medieval cathedral. This feeling is a clue. You are standing before a frozen language, a hidden message carved in geometry and light. For centuries, master builders worked from a secret playbook, a profound system of knowledge embedded in the structures we admire today. By the end of our journey, you will possess the key to deciphering this silent language for yourself. We will uncover how sacred mathematics directed every arch, why celestial alignments determined a wall's position, and what mysterious symbols are woven into the floor beneath your feet. What forgotten truths about our world are locked within these ancient stones? Within the quiet confines of the Mason's Lodge, a profound transformation took place. An apprentice was not merely learning a trade, he was learning a new way of seeing the world. His first lessons moved beyond the physical stone to the perfect, invisible forms that would give it meaning. This was the foundation of the entire craft, a language built not on words but on shapes. It was the language of sacred geometry. The master builder would begin with two simple, yet infinitely powerful shapes. He would take his compass and draw a perfect circle on the tracing floor, a shape with no beginning and no end. This, he taught, was the symbol of the heavens, of divine unity, of the eternal spirit. Then, with his straight edge, he would inscribe a square within that circle. The square was the earth, the four directions, the solid and stable realm of material existence. From the dynamic interplay of these two primal forms, the circle and the square, every other element of the design was believed to flow. These tools were sacred objects. The compass was not just for drawing curves, it was an instrument for reaching into the realm of perfect ideas. The straight edge was not just for ruling lines, it represented moral rectitude and the law. With them, the builder could replicate on earth the harmonic ratios that philosophers and theologians argued governed the cosmos itself. This knowledge was a carefully guarded inheritance, passed down through generations. It drew from the rigorous logic of ancient Greek mathematicians like Euclid, whose principles of geometry were preserved and studied within the scriptoria of medieval monasteries. There, monks saw in these perfect ratios the very fingerprints of a divine creator. So when a master laid out the plan for a new chapel or a great tower, he was not simply drafting a building. He was composing a hymn in stone, using a universal vocabulary of proportion. The relationship between a room's width and its height, the curve of an arch, the spacing of columns, all of these were determined by specific geometric rules. The goal was to create a structure that was in resonance, a space where the mathematics felt right, where the proportions sang in harmony. This resonance was what transformed a sturdy building into a spiritually potent vessel, a place where the earthly square and the heavenly circle were brought into perfect, tangible alignment. This silent geometric code is what we can still feel in the soaring space of a nave, a feeling of profound rightness that begins with the first mark of the compass on the dusty lodge floor. But how did this geometric vision translate into the very bones of a building? The answer lies in a silent language of numbers. The master builders worked from a foundational belief that the universe itself was constructed upon perfect, harmonious ratios. These were not just mathematical curiosities, they were seen as the sacred intervals of creation, the very frequencies of divine order. And so, the first and most essential principle of the Builder's Code was the absolute primacy of proportion and ratio. Think of it as the architectural equivalent of a musical chord. Just as certain combinations of notes sound inherently pleasing and resolved to our ears, certain spatial relationships feel inherently right and balanced to our eyes and our spirit. The most celebrated of these was the golden ratio, a number approximately equal to 1.618. You find it in the spiral of a seashell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, and the proportions of the human body. To the medieval mind, this recurrence was not coincidence, it was proof. This ratio was a divine signature, a geometric thread woven through all of creation. By incorporating it into their designs, builders were literally stitching their work into the fabric of the cosmos. A window's height might relate to its width by the golden ratio, or the length of a chapel's nave to its transept. But the builder's toolkit of harmony included simpler, equally powerful ratios. The square, a 1-to-1 ratio, represented stability and earthly perfection. The ratio of 1-to-2, known as the octave in music, created a feeling of solid foundation and clear division. The ratio of 2-to-3, which in music gives us the harmonious interval of a perfect fifth, was used to generate dynamic yet balanced spaces. A master would use these ratios like a composer uses a scale. He might decide that the width of the central aisle would be in a 2-to-3 proportion to its height, creating a space that felt both grand and intimately uplifting. The dimensions of a pillar, the arch of a vault, even the layout of a floor plan, all were derived from this interconnected web of sacred numbers. This was not arbitrary decoration or a search for superficial beauty. This was calculated, intentional harmony. The goal was to construct an environment that resonated. When you stand in a medieval cathedral and feel a sense of profound peace, a quiet awe that seems to emanate from the stones themselves, you are feeling the result of this ancient arithmetic. The very blocks were cut to dimensions that echoed these universal constants. In this way, mathematical truth, a truth believed to be of divine origin, was physically embedded into the building's fabric. The structure became a silent symphony of proportion, a place where geometry was not just seen but felt, a tangible intersection of earth and heaven built according to a forgotten celestial score. Yet geometry was only the first layer of their grand design. If proportion was the building's soul, then its placement was its vital connection to the cosmos. The medieval builder did not see an empty plot of land. He saw a sacred intersection, a precise point where the currents of the sky met the energies of the earth. This brings us to the second principle of the builder's code, a profound practice of alignment with celestial and terrestrial forces. The orientation of a major church was never left to chance. Before a single foundation stone was laid, careful astronomical observations were made. The goal was to align the entire structure, most specifically its high altar, with a significant celestial event. Often, this meant orienting the building so that on the feast day of its patron saint, the rays of the rising sun would stream directly down the main aisle, flooding the altar in a bath of divine light. This moment of annual illumination was a planned miracle, a physical demonstration of heaven's grace touching the earthly realm. It transformed the building from a static object into a dynamic instrument, a colossal sundial marking sacred time. But the builders' considerations reached beyond the sky and into the ground beneath their feet. Historians and researchers of ancient landscapes note that many sacred sites, from standing stones to cathedrals, appear positioned along subtle alignments known in later traditions as ley lines. While the term itself is modern, the intuitive concept is ancient, a recognition of certain places possessing a unique telluric potency, a special energy or presence. The choice of a building site was thus a form of deep listening. A master might select a location where springs emerged, where the land formed a particular shape, or where local tradition spoke of spiritual significance. By placing their geometric masterpiece upon such a potent nexus, they believed they were weaving its stones into the very living tapestry of the universe. The structure would act as both a receiver and an amplifier, harmonizing celestial influences with terrestrial energies. This was architecture as an act of resonance on a planetary scale. The building became a fixed point in a cosmic dialogue. its alignment ensuring it was not merely on the land but of it, and forever in conversation with the turning heavens above. This perfect geometric vision, however, had to find its way from the mind into the world. Before the quarrymen swung their hammers, before the mortar was mixed, the entire structure existed in a state of perfect completion within the master builder's consciousness. This was the third principle of the code, the creation of a visionary blueprint. It was more than a simple sketch or a list of measurements. It was a total inner vision, a complete spiritual and emotional template for the building to come. The master would cultivate this vision through deep contemplation, study of sacred texts, and prayer, seeing the finished space not as an object but as an experience. He would envision the path of light through a stained glass window at dawn, the way sound would resonate in the choir, the feeling of awe a pilgrim would feel upon first entering the nave. This process drew direct inspiration from ancient traditions, such as the biblical account where divinely revealed plans for Solomon's temple were given to the craftsman, establishing a powerful precedent. The master builder saw himself as a channel for a higher design, translating a celestial idea into an earthly form. But how do you transfer such a complex, immaterial vision into a guide for hundreds of workers? The answer was the tracing floor, often a large, flat surface of plaster or stone within the lodge. This was where the visionary blueprint became tangible. Here, the master and his senior masons would draw the full-scale geometric outlines of windows, arches, and vaults directly onto the floor in chalk or charcoal. Every critical junction, every curve, every proportional relationship was laid out at its true size. This full-scale drawing was the crucial link between idea and execution. A stonecutter could come to the tracing floor, see the exact shape and angle required for a specific keystone, and create a wooden template to guide his chisel. This ensured that every single stone cut miles away at the quarry would fit perfectly into the grand puzzle. The tracing floor was a living document, constantly referenced and revised, a material anchor for the immaterial plan. It guaranteed that the sacred proportions and celestial alignments were not lost in translation. In this way, the building rising from the ground was not an approximation of an idea. It was the direct, faithful manifestation of inspired thought. The visionary blueprint ensured that every practical act of construction, every application of the coded knowledge of geometry and alignment, served a single, unified spiritual purpose, making the finished structure a true bridge between the world of thought and the world of stone. The stone itself became a teacher, but its lessons were not written in any language you could simply read. They were embedded in the very form of the building, a silent sermon in architecture. This is our third principle, the principle of encoded symbolism, where every structural element served a dual purpose. Function and meaning were fused into a single, powerful expression. Consider the most fundamental shape of a great church, the cruciform floor plan. This was not merely an efficient design for moving large congregations. To the medieval mind, walking into that space was to enter the symbolic body of Christ on earth. The long nave represented his torso, the transepts his outstretched arms, and the sanctuary his head. To walk from the entrance to the altar was to retrace a spiritual journey, moving from the worldly realm into the sacred heart of the story. Even the pillars holding up the immense stone vaults were more than supports. They were understood as the apostles and saints, steadfast figures bearing the spiritual weight of the entire community, connecting the earthly floor to the heavenly ceiling. This symbolic layer turned architecture into a living narrative. For the vast majority of people who could not read, the building itself became their primary text. Stained glass windows were not just beautiful decorations, they were illuminated manuscripts crafted from sunlight. They depicted biblical tales, the lives of saints, and complex theological concepts in a radiant palette of color and light. A worshipper could learn the entire story of creation, the lessons of the Gospels, and the promise of salvation simply by gazing upward as the sun moved through the day, casting ever-changing pictures upon the stone floor. This educational purpose extended even to the ground beneath their feet. In a few remarkable cathedrals, you can find a large labyrinth intricately laid into the floor stones. Walking this winding, unicursal path was a form of meditation, a substitute pilgrimage for those who could not travel to distant holy sites. The journey to the center symbolized the soul's difficult path toward enlightenment and inner peace, a physical act representing a profound internal process. Every curve and turn was a lesson in patience, faith, and perseverance. Through these layers of symbolism, the building was transformed into a comprehensive three-dimensional textbook. It taught theology, cosmology, history, and morality all at once. To move through the space was to actively participate in its meaning, to literally walk through a story and become part of its unfolding drama. This is why these structures resonate so deeply even with modern visitors who may not know the specific symbols. We intuitively feel that we are in a place where every stone, every beam of light, every carved leaf on a capital is whispering a part of a greater, cohesive story. The architecture itself was the curriculum, and the guilds of masons were the guardians of this profound visual language, ensuring its sacred messages were faithfully translated from generation to generation, from vision into enduring stone. Behind the soaring walls and intricate carvings stood a human institution as carefully constructed as the buildings themselves. The Masons' Guild was far more than a medieval trade union. It was the living, breathing vessel that carried the builder's code across centuries. Within its closed and hierarchical society, the sacred knowledge of geometry and the practical mastery of stone were fused into a single, indivisible craft. To become a Mason was to enter a world of secrets, a fraternity where your worth was measured not just by the strength of your arm, but by the depth of your understanding. The path began with a long and demanding apprenticeship, often lasting 7 years. A young boy would be bound to a master, learning the fundamentals through relentless practice. He would start with simple tasks, dressing rough stone, mixing mortar, and observing the rhythms of the lodge. But his education was dual in nature. For every physical skill, there was a corresponding symbolic lesson. As he learned to use the square to check the trueness of a corner, he was also taught that the square represented morality, honesty, and living a righteous life. The compass, which he used to scribe curves, was explained as a symbol of drawing boundaries, of understanding one's place in the world, and of reaching for spiritual perfection. This knowledge was not written down in manuals. It was transmitted through an oral tradition, passed from master to apprentice in the quiet moments after work, through stories, rituals, and symbolic gestures. The guild hall itself functioned as a school of hidden wisdom. Meetings were structured with ceremonial aspects, reinforcing the bonds of brotherhood and the solemn responsibility of their craft. Allegorical plays and recited histories taught the ethical dimensions of their work, emphasizing that the power of their geometric code carried a profound duty. A Mason was expected to be a man of integrity, for the secrets he held could be used to create structures that uplifted the human spirit or, if misused, could create spaces of oppression and fear. The Guild enforced these standards rigorously, protecting not only trade secrets from outsiders, but also ensuring the sacred purpose of their knowledge was never corrupted. This closed nature, necessary for preserving a complex, unwritten tradition, inevitably fueled intense speculation and legend in the wider world. Whispers swirled about their mysterious rites and hidden powers. Yet the Guild's true function was profoundly practical and spiritual. It created a continuum, an unbroken chain of mentorship that stretched from the master envisioning the cathedral's plan down to the apprentice cutting a simple block. This ensured that the grand visionary blueprint of one generation did not die with its creator, but could be faithfully understood, executed, and evolved by the next. The Guild was the guardian of the flame, the institution that made sure the language of sacred geometry never became a dead language but remained a living, spoken truth in the world of stone and light. This profound symbolic language found its ultimate voice not in the stone, but in the space it framed, in the very air it shaped. The medieval builders were, above all, master weavers of illumination. Their fourth principle was the sacred language of light and shadow. They understood that a building was not merely a shelter, it was a lens, a carefully crafted instrument designed to conduct, filter, and transform the most ethereal of materials, sunlight itself. This philosophy drove one of the most dramatic evolutions in architectural history, the leap from the Romanesque to the Gothic. Romanesque churches, with their massive, fortress-like walls and small, deep-set windows, spoke of a world where the divine was a powerful, sometimes distant, presence glimpsed through narrow apertures. The light inside was dim, mysterious, and pooled in shadows, encouraging introspection and awe before a formidable power. But the Gothic vision was radically different. It was a declaration that divine light should not be cautiously admitted, but triumphantly unleashed. The development of the flying buttress was not just an engineering solution to hold up taller walls, it was the key that unlocked the stone cage. By transferring the structural weight outward, the walls themselves could become skeletal frameworks of stone tracery, filled with immense panels of stained glass. This was a profound theological statement rendered in architecture, the belief that the material world was no barrier to spiritual illumination, but a vessel meant to be saturated by it. Every window was a calculated composition. Its shape, its location, and the specific hues of its glass were all part of a celestial choreography. The master glaziers were painting with light, using a palette of cobalt blues, ruby reds, and emerald greens to transform raw sunlight into narrative. A window depicting a biblical scene was not just a picture on glass, it was a dynamic projector. When the sun passed behind a cloud, the colors would deepen and grow solemn. When it shone brightly, the interior would blaze with radiant color, as if the story itself was coming to life with divine energy. The most spectacular examples of this light-wielding mastery are the great rose windows, often positioned high on the west facade or the transepts. These intricate, wheel-like designs were more than decorative triumphs, they were cosmic diagrams and light calendars. Their complex geometric tracery, derived from the same sacred principles used to lay out the floor plan, would catch the sun at specific angles. On the equinoxes, for instance, the low afternoon sun might align perfectly to send a beam of light shooting through a particular petal of the stone rose, illuminating a specific symbol or statue across the interior with pinpoint accuracy. This was not an accident, it was a planned miracle, a silent, annual sermon delivered by the sun itself. Similarly, the alignment of a side chapel window might be calculated so that on the feast day of its dedicated saint, the first rays of dawn would pour through, painting the altar in a pool of golden light for just those few sacred minutes. This manipulation of light and shadow did something extraordinary. It turned a static, immutable structure of stone into a dynamic, ever-changing spectacle. The building lived and breathed with the day, the season, the weather. It directly orchestrated the emotional experience of anyone inside. The dim, mysterious light of dawn would give way to the explosive color of midday, which would slowly soften into the long, melancholic shadows of evening. This daily cycle within the sacred space mirrored the soul's own journey from seeking to revelation to quiet contemplation. The builders demonstrated a sophisticated, intuitive understanding of human perception, knowing that light does not just allow us to see a space, it fundamentally shapes how we feel within it. Their code taught that true architecture was not about enclosing space, but about sanctifying the light that filled it. These tools were never just iron and wood in a craftsman's belt. They were sacred objects, each one a key to a different dimension of the builder's work. To wield them was to participate in a ritual that connected the act of construction to the very principles of the universe. The most revered was the compass, the instrument that could trace a perfect, endless circle. This shape, with no beginning and no end, was the ultimate symbol of the heavens, of the eternal spirit, and of the divine mind that conceived all creation. When a master set his compass point and swept the leg around, he was not merely drawing a guideline for an arch. He was, in that motion, invoking the celestial realm, declaring his intention to bring a fragment of that infinite perfection down to earth. Its partner was the square, the tool that created the precise right angle. If the compass reached for the sky, the square was firmly planted on the ground. It represented the material world, the four cardinal directions, and the stable foundation of earthly existence. But its meaning went deeper. The square was the emblem of morality, of honesty, and of justice. A stone that was true on the square was not just correctly shaped, it was ethically sound. It spoke to the builder's own character, demanding that he be as upright in his life as the angles he produced in his work. Then came the level, a simple tool that revealed whether a surface was perfectly horizontal. This was the great equalizer. It ensured that the weight of the structure was distributed fairly, that no single point bore an undue burden. Symbolically, the level stood for balance, equality, and the fair treatment of all. It reminded the guild that their society and the greater community they served should be built on the same principle of equitable foundation. Finally, there was the plumb line, a weighted chord that defined the absolute vertical. This was the tool of truth. While the square checked right angles on the horizontal plane, the plumb line judged uprightness in the vertical. It was an unwavering standard, a reference to gravity and cosmic order that could not be argued with. A wall that was in plumb was a wall built on truth, straight and unshakable. To use these tools correctly was therefore a dual discipline. Every time a mason laid his level on a newly set stone, he was performing both a technical check and a spiritual affirmation. He was asking, is this balanced? Is this just? When he dropped his plumb line beside a rising pillar, he was measuring more than physical alignment. He was testing the integrity of the entire endeavor. The tools themselves were a portable, physical manifestation of the builder's code. They translated abstract virtues into tangible actions. A master teaching his apprentice would emphasize this constantly. Holding the square, he would say, "This is how you must live." Holding the compass, he would explain, "This is what you must aspire to." The workyard became a school of applied philosophy, where geometry and ethics were one and the same. This is why the misuse of a tool was considered a serious failing. It was not just a practical error that might weaken a wall. It was a symbolic rupture, a sign that the builder had lost alignment with the cosmic order his craft was meant to embody. The tools, in their beautiful simplicity, ensured that the grand cosmic vision never remained an abstract idea. They were the hands-on instruments that made the invisible code visible, one true angle, one balanced course, one upright wall at a time. The stones of the cathedral were not mute, they were designed to sing. This brings us to the fifth principle of the builder's code, a masterful understanding of acoustic engineering and harmonic space. The medieval builders knew that a sacred experience was not solely visual, it was profoundly auditory. They shaped their vaults and walls with an empirical, almost intuitive, grasp of how sound would live and move within the stone shell. Every surface, every curve was a deliberate choice in a grand sonic design. The goal was to create an environment where sound did not just occur, but was transformed, where the human voice was lifted from its earthly limitations into something that felt celestial. Consider the challenge. A single voice or a small choir needed to fill a cavernous space and reach hundreds of people, all without any form of electronic amplification. The builders solved this with geometry. They proportioned the nave, the choir, and the apse using the same harmonious ratios found in music: the octave, the fifth, the fourth. These spaces were not just architectural volumes, they were carefully tuned resonant chambers. The specific curvature of a ribbed vault was not only for structural strength or visual grandeur, it acted as a parabolic reflector, catching the soft tones of Gregorian chant and gently projecting them outward. The hard, smooth surfaces of stone and plaster were chosen to create a long, lush reverberation. This reverberation time, the length of time a sound hangs in the air, was not an accident. It was calibrated. A note sung by a cantor would linger, blending with the notes that followed, creating a rich, continuous tapestry of sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This sonic effect had a powerful psychological and spiritual impact. It made the choir sound not like a group of individuals, but like a single, unified, angelic voice. It enveloped the congregation in a blanket of harmonious sound, a tangible presence that seemed to physically fill the space and elevate the spirit. The architecture itself became an active participant in the liturgy. During a moment of silent prayer, the lingering resonance of the last hymn would slowly fade, like a spirit departing, encouraging deep contemplation. When the organ sounded, the complex harmonics would bounce and blend within the stone tracery, creating a fullness of sound that was felt in the chest as much as heard by the ears. This was sonic geometry in its highest form. The builders even understood how to manage problematic sounds. The strategic placement of tapestries, wooden choir stalls, and the congregation itself helped to absorb excess reverberation and clarify speech when a sermon was delivered, proving their approach was nuanced and intentional. In this way, the cathedral engaged the full human sensorium. The eyes saw the divine light filtering through stained glass. The body felt the coolness of the stone and the vastness of the space, and the ears were bathed in a manufactured heaven of sound. The code was not merely about building a structure, it was about crafting a total, immersive experience, using every tool at their disposal to guide the visitor toward a moment of transcendental awe, proving that true sacred architecture speaks not just to the mind but directly to the soul. But to truly hear this silent language, we must step inside a single, perfect sentence written in stone and glass. Chartres Cathedral in France is that sentence, a comprehensive declaration of the builder's code made manifest. Rising from the plains in the 12th century, it stands not merely as a place of worship, but as a living encyclopedia of applied sacred knowledge, where every principle we have discussed converges into a breathtaking whole. Begin at the west facade before the royal portal. The sculpted figures here are not randomly placed. They are arranged in a precise geometric harmony that translates theology into visual order. The central figure of Christ is framed by an architectural canopy whose proportions echo the divine ratios, while the flanking apostles and saints are positioned according to a hierarchical scheme that mirrors the celestial hierarchy itself. This portal is a gateway in every sense, preparing the pilgrim's mind through geometry before they even cross the threshold. Once inside, the sheer coherence of the space is overwhelming. Historians and architects have long noted that the cathedral's fundamental dimensions, the width of the nave against its height, the proportions of the transept, all resonate with the golden ratio and other harmonic intervals. This was a deliberate architectural affirmation of an ancient philosophical idea, that the human form itself is a reflection of divine proportion. By building a space scaled to these same perfect ratios, the creators of Chartres were literally constructing a home worthy of the human spirit, a mirror in which humanity could recognize its own sacred geometry. The most profound geometric lesson, however, lies underfoot. Embedded in the floor of the nave is a vast labyrinth, a unicursal path nearly 13 meters in diameter. Its design is a masterpiece of sacred geometry, a complex but singular route woven into a perfect circle. To walk this path was a physical meditation, a pilgrimage compressed into a symbolic journey. The pilgrim would slowly trace every turn, moving inexorably toward the center, a rosette, which represented enlightenment or heavenly Jerusalem. This arduous, winding walk in a confined space mirrored the soul's difficult progress through life toward spiritual clarity. It made the abstract concept of a spiritual quest tangibly real, using the pure language of shape and motion to teach a lesson that words alone could not convey. And above it all, the windows. Chartres possesses one of the most complete and brilliant collections of medieval stained glass in the world. But these are not just colorful pictures, they are carefully calibrated instruments of the code. The famous blue, the Chartres blue, is of a unique depth and luminosity, achieved through a guarded recipe that transformed sunlight into a specific spiritual emotion. The windows are arranged in a theological program where their placement and the timing of the light passing through them were part of the teaching. The building itself becomes a clock and a calendar of light, with specific windows illuminating specific areas at specific hours or on specific feast days, acting out a silent, radiant drama year after year. At Chartres, there is no separation between the structural, the symbolic, and the sacred. The flying buttresses are both engineering marvels and stone prayers lifting the walls toward heaven. The sculpted foliage on the capitals teaches natural philosophy alongside biblical stories. The very floor plan is a cross, so to move through the building is to inhabit a story. This is the builder's code fully realized, not as a set of abstract rules, but as a living, breathing environment where every measurement, every statue, and every beam of colored light collaborates to create a total work of art, theology, and cosmic philosophy. To stand within Chartres is to stand inside a mind that saw the universe as an interconnected, harmonious whole, and dared to build its mirror on earth. The master builder's vision was a fragile thing, a perfect geometry held in the mind, yet it had to survive the deafening chaos of the worksite. With no paper blueprints to hand out, how could this intricate, silent code be transmitted to the army of cutters, layers, and carvers? The answer was a system of tangible translation, a bridge built from wood, plaster, and chalk. At the heart of this system was the tracing floor, a sacred space within the lodge often covered in a layer of plaster or polished stone. This was not a sketchpad for ideas. It was the full-scale, physical manifestation of the plan. Here, the master and his senior masons would draw the true size outlines of the most complex elements, the exact curves of a soaring arch, the intricate stone webs of a rose window, the precise angles of a vault rib. Every critical junction was plotted at its actual dimension, a one-to-one map of the geometry that existed in the master's mind. This direct scaling was the genius of the method. A stonecutter tasked with shaping a specific block for that arch did not need to interpret a small drawing or calculate a scale. He would come to the tracing floor, see the life-size profile drawn in chalk, and from it create a wooden template called a mold. This template was his direct instruction, an object he could carry back to his bench and trace onto the rough stone. His job was then one of pure execution, to remove everything that was not that shape. This process guaranteed an almost miraculous accuracy across hundreds of individual stones cut over months or even years by different hands. The keystone for an arch, shaped in the quarry yard in spring, would fit perfectly against its neighbors high on the north transept the following autumn, because every piece descended from the same full-scale drawing. The tracing floor was a living document. If a design needed adjustment, the plaster could be smoothed and redrawn. It was a collaborative tool, a place for solving problems in real size, and a constant reference that kept the entire sprawling project aligned to a single geometric truth. It transformed the visionary blueprint from a private meditation into a public, practical guide. ensuring that the sacred code was not lost in translation, but was faithfully carved, one true template at a time, into the waiting stone. Yet the builder's code reached beyond the visible shapes to the very essence of the shapes themselves, to the numbers that defined them. This is our sixth principle, the profound symbolism of number and numerology. For the medieval mind, numbers were not neutral quantities for counting stones. They were the fundamental archetypes of creation, each one vibrating with its own unique theological and metaphysical meaning. To use a number in design was to invoke its entire spiritual universe. The number 3 was the most sacred, a direct echo of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is why you so often see triads in cathedral architecture, 3 great portals on the west front, 3 tiers to a facade, 3 lancet windows grouped together. Each set of 3 was a silent confession of faith, a structural hymn to divine unity in diversity. 4 was the number of the earth, representing stability, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 seasons, and the 4 evangelists who spread the gospel to the corners of the world. A square chapel, a quartet of massive pillars defining a crossing, a courtyard with 4 walks, all grounded the heavenly aspiration of the building in the solid reality of the material realm. Then there was 7, a number of completion and spiritual journey. It recalled the 7 days of creation, the 7 sacraments of the Church, the 7 virtues and deadly sins. A window might be divided into 7 lights, a labyrinth might have 7 circuits, a chapel might be one of 7 radiating from an apse. Each incorporation was a reminder that the path to grace was a process, a measured progression. And 12, of course, symbolized universality and divine order, mirroring the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 months of the year. You might find 12 columns surrounding a sanctuary or 12 statues lining a nave, representing the foundation upon which the spiritual community was built. This practice was far from superstition. It was a sophisticated metaphysical framework, a way of weaving layered meaning directly into the fabric of the building. The very act of counting and measuring became a contemplative, almost prayerful practice for the master builder. When he specified that a screen should have 12 arches, he was not just solving a spatial problem. He was embedding a silent sermon about apostolic foundation into the daily path of every worshipper. Scholars and theologians of the era, like Isidore of Seville, wrote extensively on this symbolic numerology, teaching that God had created the world according to number, weight, and measure. By using these numbers, the builder was aligning his work with the original, divine blueprint of the cosmos. A pilgrim might never consciously note that the chapel had 5 sides, echoing the 5 wounds of Christ, but they would feel the resonance of that intentional harmony. The numerology was a hidden layer of the code, a frequency of meaning that operated just below the surface of conscious thought, ensuring that the structure was not just geometrically sound, but symbolically saturated, a perfect vessel for the sacred stories it was built to house and tell. This intellectual journey began not at the worksite, but in the quiet scriptorium and the scholar's study. The master builder's profound understanding of the world was structured by a specific curriculum, the Quadrivium. This was the medieval university's advanced scientific framework, the fourfold path of higher learning that followed the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. To us, these might seem like separate subjects, but to the medieval scholar, they were 4 perspectives on a single divine truth, the study of number and its manifestations in creation. Arithmetic was the pure contemplation of number itself, the essence of quantity. Geometry was number made visible, number expressed in space and form. Music was number heard, number expressed in time through harmonic intervals. Astronomy was number in majestic motion, the mathematics of the celestial spheres. This was not merely an academic exercise, it was a comprehensive model of reality, teaching that the cosmos was an ordered, intelligible whole, built upon a foundation of mathematical law. The master builder was the ultimate applied scientist of this system. He was a living bridge between this lofty theoretical framework and the gritty reality of the quarry and the crane. His daily work was a practical demonstration of the Quadrivium's unity. From arithmetic, he drew the precise calculations for the quantity of stone, the complex logistics of supply, and the financial accounts that funded decades of construction. This was number as a practical tool for management and stability. From geometry, of course, came the very language of his design, the compass and square translating theory into arches and vaults. But his application of music and astronomy is where the code reveals its deepest coherence. When he proportioned a chapel, he used the same ratios that create a perfect fifth or a resonant octave in music. The width to the height of a nave might be in a 2:3 ratio, which in music is the harmonious interval that feels both stable and uplifting. He was, in a very real sense, composing a space you could walk inside, a silent chord built from stone and light. And from astronomy came the sacred orientation, the alignment of his entire structure with the sun's path on a specific saint's day. He was fixing a moment of celestial time into the permanent fabric of the earth. By synthesizing all four arts, the builder accomplished something extraordinary. He ceased to see his cathedral as just a building. He saw it as a microcosm, a small-scale model of the mathematically ordered universe. The soaring vaults mirrored the dome of the heavens. The orderly rows of columns reflected the harmony of the spheres, and the play of light through the windows enacted the cosmic dance of sun and stars. His work was an act of philosophical declaration, proving through physical form that the same laws that govern the movement of planets also govern the creation of sacred space. The Quadrivium provided the intellectual justification for every practical choice, transforming construction from a trade into a theological and scientific statement, a three-dimensional argument for a universe built on beautiful, intelligible number. The Gothic cathedral is a stone prayer in motion. Its most dramatic features, the soaring pointed arch and the elegant flying buttress, were far more than clever engineering. They were the physical manifestation of a profound shift in spiritual consciousness, the seventh and perhaps most visible principle of the builder's code. This was not just about building taller churches, it was about building a new theology in 3 dimensions. The rounded, heavy arches of the earlier Romanesque style spoke of a world where the church was a fortress for the soul, a protective refuge in a tumultuous world. Its thick walls and small windows created a dim, mysterious interior, encouraging a feeling of awe before a powerful and somewhat distant divine presence. But the Gothic vision dared to ask a different question. What if the goal was not to shelter from the divine, but to unite with it? What if stone could be made to reach rather than merely to enclose? The answer began with a simple geometric change, the pointed arch. Unlike the rounded Roman arch, which pushes its weight outward and downward, the pointed arch channels its forces more directly upward. It is dynamic, aspirational. To the medieval eye, it unmistakably evoked 2 hands pressed together in prayer, a universal gesture of human yearning directed toward the heavens. Every row of pointed arches in a nave became a silent congregation, their stone fingers guiding both the eye and the structural loads ever upward, creating a rhythm of ascent that pulled the spirit along with it. But this new ambition created a tremendous physical problem. Pushing walls higher and piercing them with vast windows made them dangerously unstable. The revolutionary solution was the flying buttress, an innovation of breathtaking audacity. These graceful stone arms leap from external piers to catch the outward thrust of the high vaults, like a friend steadying someone reaching for a high shelf. This externalized skeleton of support performed a miracle. It liberated the wall from its load-bearing duty. The solid masses of masonry could now dissolve into intricate stone tracery, vast openings filled with stained glass. The wall was no longer a barrier but a screen, a fragile membrane between the inner world of the faithful and the outer world of divine light. This was the essence of the Gothic Revolution, a deliberate dematerialization of structure. The building shed its earthly weight to become a vessel for illumination. Where the Romanesque church made you feel the immense protective weight of the stone, the Gothic cathedral made you feel its astonishing absence. You stand in a space defined by light and air, held aloft by a seemingly impossible web of stone. This architectural shift mirrored a deep change in the medieval worldview. The earlier emphasis on judgment and protection was being joined by a powerful new longing for personal, mystical experience, for direct illumination. The Gothic cathedral was the machine built to facilitate that experience. It was designed to dissolve the boundary between inside and outside, between earth and heaven, making the celestial feel immanent, touchable, bathed in the colored light of grace. In the end, the stone itself appears to defy its own nature, achieving a spiritual weightlessness. Those towering vaults are not a ceiling, they are a representation of the soul's own aspiration, frozen in its moment of greatest yearning, proving that the builder's final code was to make the impossible seem inevitable and to turn gravity into grace. Yet the soaring stones themselves could not speak the vision into being. They required a translator, a unique mind capable of bridging the vast distance between celestial geometry and earthly mud. The master builder was far more than a skilled foreman. He was the central intellect of the entire endeavor, a rare fusion of engineer, manager, theologian, and natural philosopher. His authority stemmed from a complete mastery that was as much about spiritual insight as it was about structural physics. To manage the construction of a cathedral was to command a small city of diverse crafts, from quarrymen and carpenters to sculptors and glaziers. This required immense logistical skill, an understanding of materials, budgets, and human nature. He had to be a practical engineer, solving problems of weight, stress, and stability in real time, often innovating on the spot when a theory met the stubborn reality of stone. But his true genius lay in synthesis. He had to hold in his mind simultaneously the precise angle of a flying buttress and the symbolic meaning of the saint whose statue would stand beneath it. He needed a theologian's grasp of scripture and liturgy to ensure the building's form served its sacred purpose. Every decision, from the layout of the chapels to the subjects of the stained glass, was a theological statement. He also acted as a natural philosopher, observing the world with a curious, classifying eye. We catch a glimpse of this multifaceted mind in the rare survival of a personal sketchbook, like that of the 13th century Master Villard de Honnecourt. Its pages are a mesmerizing window into a builder's consciousness. Alongside meticulous architectural plans for choir vaults and tower elevations, he sketched ingenious mechanical devices, like a sawmill powered by water or an eternal motion machine fueled by magnets. He drew a lobster, a lion, a grasshopper, and a naked human figure, studying the proportions and mechanics of God's creation with the same analytical interest he gave to a church facade. For him, there was no separation between the study of nature and the practice of sacred art. The spiral of a snail's shell and the curve of an arch were lessons from the same divine sourcebook. This holistic understanding is what defined him. He translated the abstract ideals of his age, its faith, its philosophy, its yearning for order, into tangible, enduring form. He worked not just with his hands, but with his heart and mind, synthesizing the messages of the Quadrivium into a single, coherent, physical reality. The cathedral was his thesis, written in stone and light. It was proof that in that era, the deepest knowledge was not compartmentalized. To build a home for the divine, one had to understand the world in its entirety, from the strength of limestone to the symbolism of the number 12, from the path of the sun to the nature of human awe. The master builder stood at that crossroads, the singular mind through which the silent code finally found its voice and took shape against the sky. This seamless unity of vision demanded a corresponding unity of execution. Within the medieval workshop, the very categories we use today simply did not exist. There was no separate box labeled art and another labeled craft. Every skilled hand, from the sculptor chiseling a saint's face to the blacksmith forging a hinge, was engaged in a single, sacred endeavor known as ars, a word meaning skill directed toward a higher purpose. This is the eighth principle, the total integration of art and craft, where every discipline was a dialect of the same silent language. The master builder's geometric and symbolic blueprint was not a document for architects alone. It was the shared scripture for every guild in the yard, the stone carver studying a drawing for a column capital, the glass painter preparing a cartoon for a lancet window, the metal worker designing a decorative grille. They were all reading from the same page of the same cosmic story. Their materials differed, stone, glass, iron, but their source code was identical. This ensured a profound coherence that modern restorers struggle to replicate. When you look at a medieval cathedral, the stone foliage crawling up a pillar seems to grow naturally into the carved figures above, whose stories are then illuminated by the colored light from the adjacent window, which is held in place by wrought iron that itself twists into symbolic forms. It is all one conversation. Consider a single narrative like the life of the Virgin Mary. You would find it rendered in stone on the tympanum over a door, in colored light in a series of chapel windows, in painted fresco on a wall, and even abstractly referenced in the floral patterns of the choir stalls. A pilgrim, literate or not, could not escape the lesson. It was woven into the very fabric of their sensory experience. This collaborative, holistic approach created what later scholars would call a Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. The building was not a neutral frame for decorations. The decorations were the building, each an essential thread in a grand tapestry. Even the smallest, most hidden detail was considered meaningful. The underside of a misericord seat, only seen by a standing choir member, might be carved with a whimsical or cautionary scene. The back of a stone boss high in the shadowy vault, invisible from the floor, would still be fully finished with intricate patterning. This was not about vanity, it was a theological statement, a belief that the divine presence saw and appreciated the offering of perfect skill in even the most concealed places. The integrity of the whole depended on the integrity of every part. This philosophy created an environment where the artisan was not a mere decorator, but a storyteller and theologian in his own right, his chisel or brush giving physical form to the shared vision. The result is a power that monolithic, uniform structures lack. A Gothic cathedral feels alive because it is the product of countless individual minds and hands, all harmonized by a common code, each contributing their unique voice to a stone symphony that could only be composed by a chorus, never by a single, solitary artist. The principles that raised those stone vaults did not vanish with the last medieval mason. They simply went underground, waiting for a new age to give them fresh expression. The Renaissance, with its rediscovery of classical learning, became the perfect vessel for this ancient code. Artists and thinkers, no longer bound to the strict theological framework of the cathedral, began to apply sacred geometry to a new subject, humanity itself. Leonardo da Vinci's iconic Vitruvian Man is perhaps the most famous example. That drawing is not merely a study of anatomy, it is a philosophical manifesto. By superimposing the human form onto both a circle and a square, Leonardo was visually proving an idea that would have felt deeply familiar to a master builder, that the human body is the ultimate microcosm, its proportions mirroring the perfect mathematical harmony of the universe. This was the builder's code applied to the individual, suggesting that the same geometric laws that shaped a cathedral also shaped a person. the quest for this hidden order did not stop with public art. As religious orthodoxy gave way to the rational inquiry of the Enlightenment, the guardians of this knowledge often retreated into secrecy. Societies like the Freemasons, who traced their symbolic lineage directly to the medieval stonemasons' guilds, became custodians of the geometric and allegorical traditions. Their lodges were not workshops for stone, but for the moral and intellectual shaping of individuals, using the square, compass, and level as tools for building a better self and a better society. The language remained, but the cathedral had been internalized, built within the mind and spirit. This perennial thread of sacred geometry weaves its way right into our modern visual landscape, often where we least expect it. The clean, confident lines of a corporate logo are frequently not the product of random aesthetic choice. Designers consciously employ the golden ratio and perfect geometric shapes to communicate on a subconscious level. The elegant curve of a famous beverage logo, the balanced segmentation of a technology company's symbol, the harmonious layout of a social media platform's icon, many of these are built upon the same proportional principles that defined a Gothic rose window. They use the code to convey stability, trust, harmony, and timeless appeal, tapping into that deep human craving for visual order that feels instinctively right. From the sweeping concrete curves of an architect like Le Corbusier, who developed his own system of proportions based on the human form, to the intuitive layout of a well-designed website, the legacy is everywhere. It reminds us that the medieval builder's code was never really about religion or stone alone. It was about a fundamental human impulse, a deep-seated desire to find meaning, balance, and beauty through the silent, universal language of proportion. The tools have changed from compass and chisel to mouse and pixel, but the timeless quest to embed a hidden harmony into the world we create continues unabated, connecting the dusty tracing floor of a mason's lodge to the glowing screen of a contemporary designer. The enduring strength of a cathedral rested on a threefold promise, a principle so fundamental it was borrowed from antiquity itself. Medieval scholars and master builders were deeply familiar with the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius, who declared that a good building must possess three qualities: firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. In plain speech, this meant firmness, commodity, and delight. This ancient triad became the ninth and perhaps most comprehensive principle of the builder's code, the ultimate benchmark for their work. It was not enough for a structure to be merely strong, or merely useful, or merely beautiful. The true test of the code was its ability to achieve all three in perfect, inseparable harmony. Firmitas, or structural soundness, was the non-negotiable foundation. This was where the precise geometry and the intuitive physics came into play. Every pointed arch directing weight, every flying buttress catching thrust, every precisely cut joint in the vaulting was a direct application of geometric truth to the problem of physical firmness. The building had to stand for centuries, defying gravity and weather through the intelligent application of mathematical law. A cathedral that collapsed was not just a tragedy, it was a profound failure of the code itself. Then came utilitas, the principle of functionality. A cathedral was not a sculpture, it was a living instrument for a community. Its layout had to serve the complex choreography of the liturgy, allowing processions to flow, choirs to sing, and congregations to gather and disperse. It needed to accommodate pilgrims, host civic functions, and provide spaces for quiet prayer and bustling market days alike. The code addressed this through its visionary planning, ensuring the geometry created spaces that worked for the human bodies and rituals they were designed to contain. Finally, there was venustas, the quality of delight or beauty. To the medieval mind, this was not a superficial layer of ornament added after the fact. True venustas was the radiant, inevitable result of harmonic proportion and symbolic richness. It was the feeling you get when light pours through a perfectly proportioned window, when the sound in the nave lifts your spirit, when the alignment of pillars creates a rhythm that feels both calming and exalted. This delight was the spiritual payoff of the code, a building that was firm and useful but failed to inspire awe, that lacked this transcendent beauty, had not fully realized the vision. The genius of the builder's code was that it provided the unified methodology to achieve all three at once. The same sacred ratio that ensured a wall's structural firmness also determined the beautiful proportion of a window within it. The symbolic alignment that served the utilitarian purpose of marking a holy day also created a moment of breathtaking delight when the sun struck the altar. The Triad was a constant reminder that these goals were not in conflict, but were different facets of a single, sacred purpose. To build with the code was to weave firmness, utility, and delight into a single, unbreakable thread, creating spaces that were not only monuments to faith, but enduring gifts to human experience, designed to be useful, to last, and above all, to lift the heart toward something greater. Embedded in the cool stone floor, a silent whirlpool awaits the faithful. The cathedral labyrinth, most famously at Chartres, is not a decoration. It is a machine for the mind, a walkable geometric prayer that distills the entire builder's code into a path you can trace with your own feet. This single, continuous circuit winding toward a central rosette presents a profound paradox. Its goal is never in doubt, the center is always visible, yet the route to reach it is deliberately long, complex, and indirect. This was the genius of its design, a perfect metaphor made physical. For the medieval pilgrim unable to undertake the perilous journey to the Holy Land, this stone path offered a substitute. To walk it was to embark on a miniature pilgrimage, each turn representing the hardships and unexpected detours of a spiritual life. The body's slow, deliberate movement became a form of kinetic meditation, a way to quiet the chatter of the mind by focusing on the simple, physical act of placing one foot before the other on the ancient, worn stones. Unlike a maze which is designed to confuse and trap with its dead ends, the labyrinth offers a guaranteed destination. Its message is one of ultimate assurance. No matter how circuitous the path, how many times you seem to double back or move away from the center, you are always on the one true road to your goal. This embodied a core tenet of medieval faith, that while life is full of twists and unforeseen trials, the path to grace, though long, is unwavering for those who persist. The design itself is a masterpiece of applied sacred geometry. Laid out with compass and straightedge, its pattern is based on a series of concentric circles divided into quadrants, then connected by a precise, meandering path known as the meander. This pattern is not a medieval invention. Its roots stretch back to ancient Crete and beyond, suggesting the builders were incorporating a universal symbol of journey and transformation into their Christian framework. Walking the labyrinth engages the code on every level. The pilgrim's body traces the sacred geometry, physically enacting the spiritual journey. The mind, focused on the path, enters a state of receptive contemplation. And the soul, according to the theology of the time, is drawn closer to the divine center with every step. It transforms an abstract theological concept, the difficult journey of the soul, into a direct, personal, and unforgettable physical experience. In this one stone diagram, we see the builder's code in its purest form, a perfect fusion of geometric rigor, symbolic depth, and embodied practice, proving that the most powerful sermons in these great buildings were often preached not from a pulpit, but from the floor beneath your feet. The stone rose window is more than a marvel of colored glass. It is a confession of faith in a perfect, invisible world. This brings us to a 10th and deeply philosophical principle of the builder's code, a belief in archetypal patterns and timeless forms. The master builders were not just shaping stone, they were reaching for ideas that existed long before the first foundation was dug. Their inspiration flowed from a powerful philosophical current that had survived for centuries, the teachings of the ancient Greek thinker Plato. Plato proposed that our material world is merely a shadow, a flawed copy of a higher realm of perfect and eternal ideas. In that realm, a perfect circle exists, an ideal triangle, an absolute square. These are the Platonic forms, the original blueprints from which all earthly circles, triangles, and squares are imperfect reflections. The medieval theologians and builders adopted this view with a profound twist. They saw these perfect geometric forms not as abstract philosophical concepts, but as eternal thoughts in the mind of the divine creator. The circle, with its infinite, center-pointed symmetry, was the archetype of heaven, unity, and the spirit. The triangle, stable and directional, represented the Holy Trinity. The square was the archetype of the earth, of stability and the four elements, and the spiral, seen in galaxies and seashells, was the archetype of growth, journey, and cosmic evolution. These shapes were not human inventions. They were discovered, recognized as the sacred alphabet with which the universe was written. This belief transformed the act of building into a holy pursuit of approximation. The builder's monumental task, then, was to take rough, imperfect limestone and coax it as close as humanly possible to these celestial ideals. Every arch was an attempt to capture the essence of a perfect curve. Every vault was a striving toward ideal spatial harmony. The breathtaking rose window is perhaps the ultimate example of this striving. It is a deliberate, radiant attempt to materialize the perfection of the circle and to demonstrate the radiating harmony of divine light emanating from a single, central source. Its intricate stone tracery and jewel-like glass are not merely decorative. They are a philosophical argument in iron and silica, asserting that perfect order and beauty are real and can be glimpsed here below. By grounding their designs in these universal archetypes, the builders were doing something extraordinary. They were connecting their local, temporary creation, a cathedral that might take generations to complete, to a timeless, transcendent reality. This meant the building rising from the French countryside or the English town was not a new creation in the modern sense. It was a revelation, a momentary making visible of pre-existing divine patterns that had always been true. The cathedral was an act of remembrance, not just invention. It was an effort to pull back the curtain of the material world, if only for a moment, and let the eternal geometry shine through, offering a tangible anchor for the human spirit in a reality far greater than stone. The silent language of geometry was not the only code whispered in the medieval world. In the shadows of the same libraries and workshops, other minds were deciphering a different set of instructions for the universe, instructions they believed were written in the stars, in metals, and in the human soul itself. This was the realm of alchemy and Hermetic philosophy, and while the master builder's primary concern was stone, his intellectual world brushed tangentially against these secretive arts. They shared a common ancestor, a profound belief in a cosmos connected by invisible threads of meaning. The foundational Hermetic principle, as above, so below, could have served as a motto for the cathedral builders. It declared that the patterns of the heavens were mirrored in the affairs of the earth, that the macrocosm and the microcosm reflected one another. This is precisely what the builders enacted in stone, creating a microcosmic universe where the vaults mirrored the celestial dome, the columns stood for earthly stability, and the light represented divine influence flowing downward. Both traditions sought to understand and harness these correspondences, to build a bridge between the material and the spiritual using the tools of observation and symbolic language. Where the builder used a compass to capture the circle of heaven, the alchemist used a furnace to enact the transformative cycles of the planets. Their ultimate goals, though different in practice, resonated on a symbolic level. The alchemist's famed quest was not merely to turn lead into gold in a literal sense, but to enact a spiritual purification, to refine the base material of the human soul into its perfected, golden state. This process was described in a rich, symbolic language of death, rebirth, and sacred union, often called the chemical wedding of opposites, listen to the echoes in the builder's work. His craft was also one of profound transformation. He took the base material of rough, unshaped stone from the dark earth, the prima materia of the quarry. Through the application of sacred geometry, the fire of his knowledge and skill, he purified and elevated it. He transformed that inert rock into a speaking stone, a block that now held a precise geometric angle, a carved face of a saint, or a part of a vault that reached for the sky. This was a spiritual vessel in the most literal sense. The entire cathedral can be seen as an alchemical masterpiece, the product of a decades-long great work where chaotic nature was patiently ordered into a manifestation of divine harmony. The parallels extend to their search for a primal language. Alchemists and Hermeticists believed that before the confusion of human tongues, there existed a perfect, Adamic language that named things according to their true essence. Many suspected this lost tongue was not made of words at all, but of number and shape, the very language of geometry that structures creation. This is exactly the language the builders claimed to use, the silent code of proportion and form that they believed any soul, in any time, could intuitively feel and understand. It is crucial to note that the master mason was likely not a practicing alchemist stirring vats in a hidden laboratory. His work was public, communal, and orthodox in its ultimate purpose. Yet the intellectual currents of his time flowed through shared channels. The symbolic vocabulary of transformation, the obsession with cosmic correspondence, and the reverence for geometric truth created a common philosophical ground. When you look at a Gothic cathedral, you are therefore seeing more than a church. You are looking at a sibling artifact to the alchemist's ornate manuscripts, both born from the same profound medieval conviction that the visible world is a veil, and that with the right key, the right code, one could learn to read the hidden text of the divine. The principles that guided the medieval master are not relics of a distant past. They are living tools, a forgotten operating system for beauty and meaning that we can consciously choose to reboot in our own time. The Builder's Code offers us more than historical insight. It provides a practical framework for evaluating and shaping the world we are building right now. Look at the device you might be using to listen to this very story. Its design is almost certainly governed by the same principles of harmonic proportion and intuitive geometry that defined a cathedral's floor plan. Graphic designers and user interface architects use the golden ratio and grid systems derived from sacred geometry to create layouts that feel balanced, trustworthy, and easy to navigate. A well-designed app or website guides your eye effortlessly, creating a sense of calm clarity. This is not an accident. It is the modern application of that ancient quest for visual harmony, proving that our brains are still wired to respond to the same silent language of order. This language extends into the physical spaces we inhabit. The most forward-thinking architects today are returning to these core tenets, not for religious symbolism, but for human well-being. The integration of light, space, and acoustics is no longer a luxury. It is the cornerstone of sustainable and human-centric design. A modern library or office building that prioritizes natural light, uses materials that modulate sound gently, and creates spaces with thoughtful proportions is directly applying the Builder's Code. It creates environments that reduce stress, foster focus, and uplift the spirit, recognizing that the geometry of our surroundings actively shapes our mental and emotional state. This is architecture rediscovering its role as a vessel for human experience, not just a container for activity. Perhaps the most profound lesson for us lies not in the specific ratios, but in the mindset of the master builder himself. His greatest strength was interdisciplinary synthesis. He refused to compartmentalize knowledge. For him, science, art, philosophy, and spirituality were not separate subjects, but different facets of a single, coherent truth. He was a practical engineer, a natural philosopher, a theologian, and an artist all at once. In our era of extreme specialization, this holistic approach is a powerful antidote. The code challenges us to look for connections, to merge data with intuition, logic with beauty, and technical skill with ethical purpose. It asks us to imbue our creations, whether a software program, a public park, or a community policy, with intentionality and meaning that transcends mere utility. Ultimately, the silent stones of the medieval world pose a quiet question to our noisy, rapid present. What is the code we are writing into our own environment? What invisible language of value, what hidden proportions of priority are we building into our digital landscapes and city streets? The legacy of the builders reminds us that every human creation, from a humble tool to a sprawling metropolis, carries an embedded set of instructions for the human spirit. It can instruct us to feel hurried, isolated, and anonymous, or it can, like those ancient vaults, guide us toward clarity, connection, and a sense of awe. The choice of which code to use, which timeless principles to honor in our fleeting projects, remains ours. The tools have changed, but the responsibility to build with wisdom, harmony, and a vision for the human soul endures. Even with the key in hand, some doors remain firmly closed. For all we have decoded of the builder's geometric language, genuine and tantalizing mysteries persist, silent corners of the past that refuse to give up their secrets. These are not gaps in the historical record so much as deep wells, and they fuel passionate debate and ongoing research to this day. The first and perhaps most profound mystery concerns the nature of the lost knowledge itself. We know the principles, but what specific applications, what advanced nuances of the code were considered so potent that they were never committed to parchment? The guilds protected their secrets with fierce loyalty, transmitting them only through oral tradition and direct mentorship. Was there a layer of practical magic to their geometry, a way of calculating stresses or acoustics that bordered on an intuitive physics they could demonstrate but never fully explain? Or were the deepest secrets not about structure at all, but about the intentional placement of buildings to interact with subtle energies of the land, a science of place now lost to us? Then there is the persistent question of execution. With simple ropes, wooden templates, and iron tools, how did they achieve a precision that sometimes rivals modern machining? The fitting of multi-ton stones with seams often thinner than a coin speaks of a level of practical skill that still astounds engineers. Was this merely the product of a lifetime of disciplined practice, or did they possess calibration techniques or sighting methods that have since vanished? This leads to the most speculative frontier of all, the idea of a hidden message within the message. Just as some search for coded prophecies in the text of the Bible, a few researchers wonder if the master builders embedded a second layer of meaning into the very dimensions of their work. Could the measurements of a specific chapel, when converted through a certain numerical cipher, reveal a date or an event? Are the alignments of multiple cathedrals across a landscape part of a grand, star map-like design meant to be read from an aerial perspective they never had? While most scholars approach such ideas with great caution, they point to a broader, very real phenomenon: architectural echoes. Consider the striking similarity between certain rose window designs in French cathedrals and mandalas created in distant Tibetan monasteries, or the shared geometric motifs in Islamic tile work and the floor patterns of European cloisters. These parallels appear across vast distances and cultures with no documented contact. Do they point to a forgotten transmission of ideas along lost trade routes, carried by travelers who spoke the universal language of shape and number? Or do they suggest something more profound, that the builder's code taps into a fundamental grammar of human perception, a set of archetypal patterns that different cultures independently discovered when seeking to represent the divine? These unanswered questions are not failures of our understanding. They are its essential fuel. They remind us that the past is not a puzzle to be solved and filed away, but a conversation to be joined. Each mystery is an open invitation, a whisper from the stones that keeps the dialogue between their time and ours alive, vibrant, and endlessly compelling. The silence within the code is not empty, it is full of possibility. The true power of the code lay in its ability to unify everything. It was not a collection of separate tricks for building taller walls, but a complete way of seeing reality. For the master builder and the culture he served, there was no line between the sacred and the scientific, between a prayer and a mathematical proof. Both were pathways to the same truth. The compass that charted the heavens on his tracing floor was the same instrument that gave him the curve of an arch. The alignment to a sunrise was both an act of celestial observation and a profound gesture of devotion. In their worldview, the universe was a single, magnificent text, authored by a divine intelligence and written in the languages of number, light, and form. To study the stars was to read one chapter. To carve a parable in stone was to illustrate another. Both were acts of reverence for the same author. This synthesis is what made the cathedral possible. It was never intended to be just a building. It was conceived as a machine for transformation, an engineered environment designed to produce a specific spiritual and emotional state in anyone who entered. Its manual was written not in words, but in the very grammar of creation itself, the geometry and symbolism we have been deciphering. Every calculated ratio, every aligned axis, every symbolic carving was a cog in this magnificent apparatus, all working in unison to lift the human spirit from the mundane into the realm of awe. This holistic vision provided something we might find deeply enviable today, a profound sense of coherence. In a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, the code offered a map. It gave individuals a clear sense of place within a grand, meaningful cosmos. To be a Mason was not just to have a job, it was to have a vocation, a participatory role in the ongoing revelation of divine order. You were not merely stacking stones, you were assembling a fragment of heaven on earth, your own hands contributing to a truth larger than yourself. This integration of faith and reason, art and craft, individual labor and cosmic purpose stands in stark contrast to the fragmentation of our own age. We often compartmentalize our knowledge, treating science, art, spirituality, and ethics as separate domains that rarely speak to one another. The medieval builder's code, however, insists they are inseparable. It suggests that beauty is a kind of truth, that ethical action is built on a foundation of right relationship, and that our deepest sense of meaning arises when we feel connected to a pattern greater than ourselves. In this way, the silent stones of the past offer a quiet critique and a compelling invitation. They ask us what kind of code we are living by, and what kind of world that code is building around us, one choice, one creation at a time. Our journey through the stones has revealed a hidden dimension of the medieval world, where geometry was a prayer, vision a blueprint, and knowledge a sacred trust. We have walked the silent labyrinth of their logic, from the first circle drawn on the tracing floor to the final keystone locking a vault into place. We have uncovered a code that speaks not of secrets for their own sake, but of a profound harmony, a deliberate intention to weave the human spirit into the very structure of the universe. The legacy of these builders stretches far beyond the breathtaking skylines they left against the horizon. It lives in the quiet feeling of rightness you get in a well-proportioned room, in the intuitive design of a tool that fits perfectly in your hand, in the longing we all share to create things that are not just useful but meaningful. Their true challenge to us is not to replicate their arches, but to embrace their holistic vision, to build, in whatever form our work takes, with both intelligence and soul, to seek the beautiful alignment between function and inspiration, between the earthly square of our materials and the heavenly circle of our aspirations. So the next time your eye is drawn to an old stone building or even a modern space that makes you pause, look closer, you are not just seeing history. You are witnessing one half of a conversation that has been ongoing for 1,000 years. The stones are speaking in their silent language of proportion and light, asking a question of our own era. What code are we writing into the world we are building right now? What harmony are we composing with the choices we make every day? The invitation from the past is clear: to look for the hidden order, to build with intention, and to remember that our greatest creations have always been those that touch something timeless within us. If this exploration resonated with you, we would love to hear which principle of the Builder's Code amazed you most. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to continue deciphering history's hidden languages.